I've never been one to believe in urban legends or ghost stories. Growing up, I'd always heard tales about haunted highways, phantom hitchhikers, and strange occurrences happening late at night on long, desolate roads. But I'd always chalked them up to overactive imaginations or attempts to scare kids away from wandering off after dark. That was before it happened to me. I was driving back from a work trip, late at night, along a lonely stretch of highway. It was one of those nights where the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, making the world feel even darker, even more isolated. The highway cut through miles and miles of nothing, no towns, no gas stations, just endless trees and open road. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the rhythmic thudding of tires on the pavement. I had been driving for hours, feeling the weariness settle into my bones. The digital clock on my dashboard blinked 1:23 a.m. I knew I still had at least 2 more hours of driving ahead of me, and my eyelids were growing heavier by the minute. That's when I saw her. A figure, standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought my tired mind was playing tricks on me. A hallucination from too many hours on the road. But as I got closer, I realized it was real. It was a woman. She was standing perfectly still, facing away from the road, her long dark hair blowing in the wind. She was wearing a simple white dress, strange, given the cold weather, and she didn't seem to be moving. I instinctively slowed down. Maybe she was in trouble. Maybe she needed help. But something deep inside me screamed at me to keep going, to not stop. As I got closer, I noticed something off. Her posture. It was too rigid, too unnatural, like she was frozen in place. Her arms hung limply by her sides, her head slightly tilted. Even from a distance, something about her seemed wrong. But it was too late. I had already slowed to a near stop. My headlights washed over her, illuminating her completely. She didn't move. Not even a flinch. No reaction at all. And that's when I saw her face, or rather, the lack of it. Her head turned slightly toward me, and my breath caught in my throat. Her face, it was smooth, featureless, like someone had wiped it clean. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, pale canvas where a face should have been. A wave of terror hit me like a punch to the gut. Every instinct screamed at me to floor the gas pedal, to get out of there, but for a moment, I was paralyzed by fear. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might break under the pressure. She began to move. Not walking, but more like gliding. Slowly, she turned, facing the road fully now. Her blank face tilted upward, as if she were looking at me, though with no eyes. I couldn't be sure. Her body twitched in small, jerky movements as she began to move toward my car. My foot slammed on the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I sped off, my heart racing, my hands shaking. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't care what was behind me anymore. I just needed to get away. But the further I drove, the more the air in my car felt wrong. It grew colder, unnaturally cold, even though the heater was blasting at full force. My breath started to fog up the windshield. And then, the smell hit me. Rot. Decay. It filled the car, so strong it was overwhelming, like something dead had been rotting in there for days. I gagged, trying to keep my focus on the road, but the smell was suffocating. I rolled down the window, hoping to let some fresh air in, but it didn't help. If anything, the stench got worse. And then, I heard her. A soft whisper, barely audible, but definitely there, coming from the back seat. Stop. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I knew what I'd see, and I couldn't bring myself to face it. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. Stop the car. I pressed harder on the gas, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't going to stop. No way. I just had to keep going, keep driving, and maybe I'd be safe. But then, the car jerked violently to one side, almost as if someone had grabbed the wheel. I fought to keep control, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I made the mistake of glancing in the rearview mirror. She was there. Sitting in the back seat, her faceless head tilted forward, her body contorted in unnatural angles. Her smooth, blank face was just inches from mine, like she had been waiting for me to look. And then, her head twitched, jerked violently, as if something inside her was broken. She leaned closer, her head almost touching my shoulder now. "Let me in!" I screamed. I don't remember much after that. My mind went blank with terror. I must have swerved off the road because when I came to, the car was in a ditch, my head pounding from where I'd slammed it against the steering wheel. The smell was gone, and the car was empty. She was gone. But the whispers. I can still hear them. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't driven at night since. I can't. The fear is too strong. Every time I close my eyes, I see her blank, featureless face staring at me, feel her cold presence behind me, hear her whispers echoing in my head. I tried telling someone, a friend, the police, but they don't believe me. They think I fell asleep at the wheel, that I imagined the whole thing in my exhaustion. But I know what I saw. And I know I'm not the first. I've been researching since that night, looking into other stories, trying to make sense of what happened. It turns out, I'm not alone. There have been reports, stories passed down for decades about a woman on the side of the road, always at night, always standing still, waiting. The accounts are eerily similar: drivers slowing down, seeing her blank, twisted face, and feeling her presence long after they've driven away. Some say she's the ghost of a woman who died in a car accident decades ago, her face mangled beyond recognition. Others think she's something older, something inhuman, that takes the shape of a woman to lure people in. But one thing is always the same: those who stop, those who give in to the whispers, they don't make it. Their cars are found abandoned on the side of the road, the driver missing, without a trace. So if you're ever driving at night and you see a woman on the side of the road, don't stop. No matter how real she seems, no matter how much she might need help, don't stop. Because once you do, she'll follow you. And she'll never stop. I thought I could forget about her. I thought if I avoided driving at night, if I convinced myself it was just a trick of my exhausted mind, I'd be okay. But I was wrong. So wrong. It started a few days after the accident. Subtle things at first: cold drafts in my apartment, even when the windows were shut. Shadows that seemed to move in the corners of my vision, just out of reach. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, convinced I wasn't alone. I'd scan the room, searching for something, someone, but it was always empty. For a while, I told myself it was just trauma. A lingering side effect of the terror I'd felt that night. But then things escalated. The whispers came back. At first, they were faint, almost like background noise, so soft I wasn't even sure if I was hearing them at all. But I recognized the voice. It was her voice. The same cold, lifeless whisper from the back seat of my car. Stop. I heard it when I was in the shower, the hiss of the water masking the sound, but it was there. I heard it in the kitchen while washing dishes, the clatter of plates barely covering the faint whisper. I heard it while brushing my teeth, and I saw it in the fogged-up mirror, a blurry outline, standing behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't look. I tried drowning it out. I played music, blasted the TV, anything to keep the quiet at bay. But no matter how loud I made the noise around me, her whisper always cut through. Stop the car. I wasn't even driving anymore. I hadn't touched my car since the night of the accident. But the whispers didn't care. She didn't care. She was still there, still waiting. One night, I woke up to the smell. That same smell from the car, the stench of rot and decay. It was so strong I gagged, nearly retching in my bed. My eyes darted around the room, but there was nothing, just the darkness, the quiet. But the smell lingered, thick and oppressive, clinging to everything. I ran to the bathroom, trying to escape it, but it followed me. When I flipped on the light, that's when I saw them. Fingerprints. Smeared across the bathroom mirror, wet and glistening like someone had dragged their fingers through condensation. But it hadn't been humid. There was no reason for the mirror to be fogged up. And the fingerprints, they were long, too long, almost inhuman. I stumbled back, my chest tightening in fear. That's when I noticed something else, a message, faintly etched into the glass below the prints. Let me in. I wiped the mirror clean, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the cloth. But as soon as the words were gone, the smell disappeared too, vanishing as suddenly as it had come. I didn't sleep that night. I tried to stay away from the apartment after that. I'd stay late at work, sleep on friends' couches, anything to avoid going back home, to avoid facing her. But I couldn't avoid it forever. One night, I was sitting in my friend Jake's living room. We were having a couple of beers, talking about random things, when my phone buzzed. A text message. I glanced at the screen and felt my heart sink into my stomach. The message was from my own phone number. Come home. My blood ran cold. I showed it to Jake, my voice shaking as I tried to explain. He laughed it off, said it was probably just some glitch or a prank. But I knew better. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone, hoping that would somehow sever the connection, stop her from reaching me. But that's when the knocking started. At first, it was faint. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the front door. Jake furrowed his brow, confused. We weren't expecting anyone. He stood up, moving toward the door. Who the hell is knocking at this hour? My stomach churned. I knew who it was. Before I could stop him, he opened the door. No one was there. But the smell hit us both immediately, that same sickening, overpowering stench of rot. Jake gagged, recoiling as he peered into the empty hallway. He stepped outside, looking around for the source, but I couldn't move. My legs were glued to the floor, my eyes wide with terror. The knocking resumed, louder this time. But it wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from the window. I slowly turned to face the living room window. The blinds were drawn, but the sound was unmistakable, fingers tapping against the glass, slowly, rhythmically. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Jake, still standing by the door, looked over at me, his face pale. Dude, what the hell is going on? I didn't respond. I couldn't. I already knew what I would see if I pulled back the blinds. Let me in. Her whisper cut through the silence. This time, Jake heard it too. His eyes widened, and he backed away from the window, the color draining from his face. Is someone out there? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I shook my head. No. It's her. Jake didn't understand. How could he? He hadn't been there that night on the road. He hadn't seen her face or lack of one. He hadn't heard her voice, cold and empty, or smelled the death that followed her wherever she went. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Jake and I exchanged a look, one filled with equal parts confusion and terror. Then, the window shattered, glass exploded into the room as the blinds were ripped down. I screamed, stumbling backward, my heart hammering in my chest. Jake rushed toward the window, but I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. No. Don't look. But it was too late. Standing just outside the broken window was her. The woman from the road. Her blank, faceless head tilted toward us, her body twitching unnaturally, like before. But this time, she wasn't alone. Dozens of figures stood behind her, all with the same featureless faces, all watching, waiting. Their heads twitched and jerked in that same unnerving way, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. Jake gasped, stumbling back, his hands shaking. What the hell are they? I don't know, I whispered. But we need to get out of here. Now. We ran for the back door, not looking back. I could hear the whispers chasing us, growing louder, more desperate. Let me in. We didn't stop running. We didn't stop until we were miles away, until we were sure they weren't following us anymore. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I know she's not done with me. I can feel her presence lurking, waiting, always just out of sight. I don't know how long I have before she finds me again. But I know one thing for sure, if you ever see her, if you ever see them, don't stop. Don't look. Don't listen to the whispers. Because once they find you, they won't stop. And they'll take you, just like they almost took me. And next time, I don't think I'll be able to escape. I keep hearing the knocking now. It follows me, no matter where I go. Tap. 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 Just outside the door. Just outside the window. Let me in. After the night Jake and I fled from the house, things only got worse. Much worse. I thought escaping would buy me time, a way to distance myself from her and the faceless things that followed her. But no matter how far I ran, no matter how many towns I passed through, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was close. Watching. Waiting. The whispers became more frequent, seeping into every part of my life, even during the day. Every time I was alone, I'd hear that familiar, cold voice, let me in. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't risk closing my eyes anymore. The nights were the worst when the darkness fell. I'd sit in whatever dingy motel room I had rented, listening for the knocking. It always came. Sometimes from the walls, sometimes from the windows, even when I was on the second floor. Tap. 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 Always in that same slow, rhythmic pattern, like she was reminding me that she hadn't forgotten. Like she was just outside, waiting for me to make a mistake. But now, it wasn't just her. The faceless things I had seen behind her, they were coming too. I'd see them in the reflections of windows, standing just out of reach, their heads twitching in that unnatural, jerking motion. Once, I caught a glimpse of them in a gas station bathroom mirror, lined up behind me, perfectly still. Their blank faces looked at me, or through me, it was impossible to tell. I smashed the mirror and ran. But they were always there, just out of sight, just beyond the corner of my vision. It wasn't long before Jake stopped answering my calls. At first, he'd been supportive, telling me it was all in my head, a result of stress. But after that night, when we'd both seen them, he knew something was wrong. He knew I wasn't imagining things. But then, he stopped responding. I tried to go to his place. The door was locked, the windows dark. I knocked, but no one answered. His neighbors hadn't seen him in days. I waited outside for hours, calling his name, hoping he was just hiding, too scared to come out. But I never heard from him again. That's when I knew she had gotten him. The whispers grew louder after that, as if she was gloating. She had taken Jake because I had brought her to him. And now, it was only a matter of time before she came for me. I couldn't run anymore. I was exhausted, barely holding on to my sanity. I needed answers. I needed to know what she was, why she was hunting me, and how I could stop her. That's when I found him. Through my desperate research, I stumbled upon an old internet forum, one dedicated to strange, paranormal encounters. There was a thread, buried deep in the archives, where people had shared stories similar to mine. They talked about a woman in white, standing on the side of the road, faceless, waiting. Some claimed to have seen her, others had only heard about her through whispers passed down from locals. But one post stood out. It was from a man named Carl. His story was eerily similar to mine. He had encountered the woman while driving late at night, had heard her whispers, had seen the faceless figures trailing behind her. But there was something different about his account. He claimed to have survived. According to Carl, the woman was a wraith, a vengeful spirit cursed to wander the roads, trapped between life and death. She lures people in with her helpless appearance, waiting for them to stop, waiting for them to acknowledge her. Once you've seen her, you're marked. The more attention you give her, the stronger her hold becomes. The whispers, the knocking, the faceless things, they were all part of her, extensions of her curse. But there was something else. Something I hadn't expected. There was a way to stop her. Carl's post described a ritual, something old, passed down from generation to generation by those who had survived encounters with her. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without risk, but it was the only way. The key, Carl said, was to confront her, to face the wraith head-on without fear, and then deny her power. Reject her. Refuse to give in. The instructions were vague, but I didn't have a choice. I was running out of time. That night, I made my decision. I drove back to where it had all started, back to the stretch of highway where I had first seen her. The road was empty, just as it had been that night. The only sound was the steady hum of my engine and the occasional rustling of wind through the trees. I drove slowly, scanning the sides of the road, waiting for her to appear. It didn't take long. I saw her standing in the distance, her pale figure illuminated by my headlights. She hadn't changed, still in that same white dress, still facing away from the road, her long, dark hair flowing down her back. Her posture was as unnatural as ever, too still, too rigid. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stop the car. This time, I had to stop. I took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my nerves. I stepped out of the car. The air was colder than it should have been, biting through my jacket. The smell of decay hit me almost immediately, but I fought the urge to gag. I walked toward her, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The closer I got, the more the whispers grew. "Let me in." I stopped a few feet away from her. Her faceless head twitched, just like before, but she didn't turn to face me. Not yet. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. My hands shook, but I forced myself to speak. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, though my voice wavered. "You can't have me. I won't let you." She didn't move. The air grew colder, and I could feel the presence of the faceless figures around me, closing in, just like they had before. But I stood my ground. I had to. This was the only way. "You're nothing," I continued, louder this time. "You don't control me. You don't control anything." Her body twitched violently, jerking as though something inside her was breaking. Slowly, she began to turn. I fought the urge to run, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But I stayed still. I had to face her. When she turned fully, I saw her blank, smooth face again. That terrible, featureless canvas. She tilted her head, her body twitching as if it were struggling to stay upright. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her faceless head began to crack. A thin line appeared down the center of her face, like a crack in porcelain. It spread, fracturing her blank visage. The cracks deepened, widening, as the faceless figures around her began to dissolve into shadows, retreating back into the darkness. Her whispers grew frantic, desperate. "Let me in. Please, let me in." But I didn't answer. I stood there, refusing to give her the power she craved. The cracking continued, spreading down her body, until finally, with a deafening snap, she shattered. The pieces of her fell to the ground, dissolving into nothing, carried away by the wind. The faceless figures vanished with her, leaving only silence in their wake. It was over. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty road. The air felt lighter now, the oppressive weight that had followed me for weeks gone. She was gone. I don't know if the ritual had truly broken the curse, or if she'll ever return. But I do know one thing: if you're driving at night, and you see a woman on the road, don't stop. Don't listen to her. Don't look. Because if you do, you might not be as lucky as I was. And next time, I don't think anyone will be able to stop her.